A courtroom should be a place of justice, but for Agent Emily Lawson, it becomes a battleground. What starts as a wrongful accusation against her quickly unravels into a dangerous conspiracy involving corruption at the highest levels of power. With a stolen USB containing damning evidence, a man long thought to be dead, and powerful enemies willing to kill to keep their secrets buried, Emily is forced into a race against time. As bullets fly and alliances shift, the question isn't just about who can be trusted, it's about who will make it out alive. Stay until the very end, because the truth is far bigger than anyone ever imagined. And before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. What happens when a woman walks into a courtroom, accused of obstructing a federal investigation, only to reveal a badge that stops everyone cold? How can a government agent be treated like a criminal in a place meant for justice? And most importantly, who is truly on trial here? The courtroom was packed. The air inside the court chamber was thick with tension. Spectators whispered among themselves as officers tightened their grip on the woman standing at the defendant's table. She had long auburn hair tied in a firm ponytail, piercing green eyes that scanned the room like a hawk, and a posture that radiated quiet defiance. Defendant Emily Lawson is charged with obstruction of justice, the prosecutor, David Holloway, announced, his voice echoing off the wooden walls of the court. Emily didn't flinch. Her hands remained still on the table, but her right fingers tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm against the surface, a habit she had whenever she was calculating her next move. Judge Reynolds, a stern woman with sharp features, adjusted her glasses. Does the defense wish to make an opening statement? Before Emily's attorney could even respond, a uniformed officer stepped forward and leaned toward Emily. "Whatever you're planning," he muttered, "don't make this worse for yourself." That was when Emily made her move. With a smooth motion, she reached into her inner coat pocket and pulled out a small, sleek black leather badge case. With a flick of her wrist, she flipped it open, revealing the unmistakable golden shield of the United States Secret Service. Gasps filled the courtroom. The officers around her hesitated, their grips loosening. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order in the court." Holloway's smirk faltered. "What kind of trick is this?" he spat. Emily's voice was calm, but her words were razor-sharp. "Not a trick. I am a federal agent. And you, Mr. Holloway, just attempted to prosecute someone who was running an undercover investigation." The silence that followed was deafening. The judge narrowed her eyes. "Are you telling this court that you are an active Secret Service agent?" Emily nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom erupted. Reporters in the back scribbled furiously in their notepads. A few audience members whispered frantically. The officers, who had been restraining her moments ago, now looked at each other, unsure what to do. "Prove it," Holloway challenged. Emily slid a small laminated ID from the badge holder and placed it on the evidence table. A bailiff picked it up and handed it to the judge. She studied it carefully, then looked up with a face drained of its usual authority. "This is legitimate," she murmured. For the first time, a flicker of panic crossed Holloway's face. Judge Reynolds turned to the officers. "Release her immediately." But before anyone could comply, another voice cut through the courtroom. "Do not release her," a man in a dark suit commanded as he entered. The badge on his belt gleamed, FBI. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Agent Calloway," she said, recognizing the man. "Emily Lawson," Calloway replied, his tone cold. "You're under arrest for impersonating a federal agent." The courtroom gasped again. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Emily didn't resist as the officers grabbed her arms again, but she let out a small chuckle. "Really? Is that the best you've got?" Holloway smirked again. "This time we have you, Lawson. You're not walking out of this court today." But Emily's eyes never wavered. "You still don't get it, do you?" She lifted her wrist slightly, revealing a sleek smartwatch. With a quick tap, the screen flickered, and then a notification popped up on the judge's phone. The judge glanced at the screen, then visibly paled. She turned the phone around, displaying the message for everyone to see. Thaw her out. She's legit. Direct order from the director of the Secret Service. The courtroom was silent once more, and just like that, everything changed. The weight of the message on the judge's phone pressed down on the entire courtroom. Every officer, every spectator, and even the prosecutor himself stared at the glowing words in disbelief. Thaw her out. She's legit. The order was clear, but no one moved. Emily remained still, her wrists restrained by the officers, but her expression was unreadable. She had played her card, and now she was watching to see who would make the next move. Judge Reynolds cleared her throat, regaining her composure. "Agent Calloway," she said, her voice firm, "would you care to explain why you just attempted to arrest a verified federal agent in my court?" Calloway's jaw tightened. He took a slow step forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe that Agent Lawson is compromised. She may be involved in obstructing a critical federal investigation." Emily let out a dry laugh. "That's rich coming from you." Calloway ignored her, turning his attention back to the judge. "I request that this court allow her to remain in custody until we can fully verify her claims." Judge Reynolds set her phone down and folded her hands together. "Agent Calloway, unless you have hard evidence to support this request, I cannot, in good conscience, permit the unlawful detainment of a verified federal agent." She nodded toward the officers. "Release her immediately." The grip on Emily's arms loosened. The officers hesitated before finally stepping back, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Calloway's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Your Honor." "No," Emily cut in, rubbing her wrists. "The mistake was yours the moment you walked into this courtroom thinking you could control the narrative." The tension in the court grew thicker. Holloway, who had been silent for the past few moments, suddenly leaned forward. "Agent Lawson," he said, his voice measured, "if you really are who you say you are, then you should have no problem answering a simple question." Emily turned to him, unimpressed. "Try me." Holloway crossed his arms. "Why were you interfering with a federal case? What was so important that you felt the need to obstruct justice?" Emily smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You tell me, Mr. Holloway. After all, you're the one who just tried to prosecute me for doing my job." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Holloway's fingers tightened into fists, but he quickly regained his composure. Calloway took a step closer. "We know you've been investigating something off the record, Lawson. What is it?" Emily tilted her head slightly, as if considering whether to answer. Then, with deliberate slowness, she reached into her coat pocket again. "Careful," one of the officers warned, resting a hand on his holster. Emily pulled out a small USB drive and held it up between her fingers. "This," she said, "is what you're all so afraid of." The room went still. Holloway's smirk faltered. Calloway took another step forward, his eyes narrowing. "What's on it?" Emily glanced around, taking in the eager, anxious faces, watching her every move. "Proof," she said simply. "Proof of what?" Calloway pressed. Emily rolled the USB between her fingers. "Proof that the case you're so desperate to keep me out of isn't about justice. It's about covering up a conspiracy inside this very courtroom." A collective gasp filled the room. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. "Agent Lawson, are you accusing federal officers of corruption?" Emily met her gaze with unwavering confidence. "No, Your Honor. I'm not accusing them." She turned back to Calloway and Holloway. "I'm exposing them." Calloway's hand twitched. For a brief second, Emily saw something flicker in his eyes, fear. That was when the lights went out. A loud thud echoed through the courtroom, followed by a sharp gasp. When the emergency lighting flickered on a second later, the USB was gone. Emily spun around, scanning the room. Calloway and Holloway stood still, their expressions unreadable. And then she heard a faint click. She turned just in time to see someone in the back of the courtroom, slipping the USB into their pocket. Emily's breath caught. It was the man she thought had been dead. The courtroom, once a place of law and order, had descended into chaos. People murmured in confusion, their voices blending into a rising hum of uncertainty. Emily barely registered them. Her focus was locked onto the man standing in the back, his fingers discreetly slipping the stolen USB into his pocket. Daniel Ross. He was supposed to be dead. Emily felt her breath hitch, but she forced herself to remain composed. This wasn't just about the USB anymore. This was about the truth, one she had spent months chasing, one she had risked everything for. And now, the very man she had sworn to protect was standing before her, very much alive and betraying her. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she took a step forward. Daniel? The man stiffened. For a split second, she saw something in his eyes: shock, regret, or maybe guilt. Then, just as quickly, he masked it with indifference. Agent Lawson, he said smoothly, his voice steady. It's been a while. The way he said it, so casual, so detached, made something inside Emily snap. You were declared dead 6 months ago. I was at your court hearing when they presented evidence that you had been killed. Daniel's expression didn't change. Looks like they were wrong. Emily's fists clenched. Where have you been? That's none of your concern. She took another step toward him, but before she could get closer, Calloway's voice rang out behind her. Nobody move. The courtroom froze. Officers raised their hands to their holsters, ready to draw. Calloway's stance was rigid, his eyes locked onto Daniel like a predator eyeing its prey. Ross, he said, his voice measured but dangerous. You need to hand over that USB. Now. Daniel smirked. And why would I do that? Holloway stepped forward, his expression dark. Because if you don't, I'll personally make sure you never set foot outside this courthouse again. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. You all seem to think you're in control here. He pulled the USB from his pocket, rolling it between his fingers. But let me tell you something, this little device doesn't just expose a case of federal corruption. His eyes flicked toward Holloway, then Calloway. It exposes you. A deadly silence filled the room. Emily's stomach dropped. She turned to Holloway, then to Calloway. Their faces were unreadable, but she saw the stiffness in their posture, the slight flicker of unease in their expressions. Daniel smirked. I can see it now. You two thought you could control the narrative, didn't you? That you could manipulate the system, silence those who got too close, and keep your hands clean. He tossed the USB in the air and caught it effortlessly. But the problem with secrets is that they always find a way to the surface. Holloway's face turned red. Enough of this. He nodded at the officers. Seize him. The moment the officers moved, Daniel reacted. In one swift motion, he spun around, pushing past a stunned bailiff and sprinting toward the back exit of the courtroom. Stop him, Calloway shouted. Emily didn't hesitate. She bolted after Daniel, dodging past the scrambling officers. She heard footsteps pounding behind her. Calloway and Holloway were in pursuit as well. Daniel shoved open the heavy wooden door leading out of the court hall. But Emily was fast. She reached him just as he turned a corner and grabbed his arm, yanking him back. You're not running from me, she growled. Daniel twisted free and pinned her against the wall, his face inches from hers. I'm not your enemy, Emily. She glared at him. Then why steal the USB? His eyes softened, just for a second. Because you don't know the full story. Then tell me. Daniel hesitated. Behind them, footsteps thundered closer. Time was running out. Meet me outside the courthouse in 1 hour, he whispered. Alone. Then, before she could stop him, he slipped away into the shadows. And just like that, the ghost disappeared again. The courthouse clock ticked away the minutes, each second dragging heavier than the last. Emily stood near the entrance, her back against the cold stone wall, scanning every face that passed. Daniel had given her 1 hour. 58 minutes had passed. She had spent those minutes questioning everything: why he was alive, why he had stolen the USB, and most importantly, what he meant when he said she didn't know the full story. A cold breeze swept through the court plaza, making the flags above the entrance flutter. It was late afternoon, and the sun cast long shadows over the steps leading down to the street. A few journalists lingered, hoping for a statement from someone involved in the dramatic scene earlier inside the courtroom. Emily kept her head down, adjusting the collar of her coat. Then she saw him. Daniel emerged from the alley across the street, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. His movements were cautious, eyes darting around, as if expecting an ambush. Emily exhaled, pushing off the wall and stepping toward him. "You're late," she said. Daniel smirked. "You waited. Because I need answers." He nodded, glancing around before motioning her toward a side street away from prying eyes. "We can't talk here. Too many ears near the courthouse." Emily hesitated. "You think someone's watching us?" Daniel lowered his voice. "I don't think." "I know." They walked in tense silence until they reached a quiet alley between two buildings. Daniel finally stopped and turned to her. "You were assigned to protect me, right?" he asked. Emily crossed her arms. "Yes. Until you were reported dead." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And did you ever question that report?" Emily hesitated. "It came from reliable sources." Daniel scoffed. "Reliable sources? The same ones trying to bury this case." She frowned. "Are you saying your death was staged?" He pulled out the USB from his pocket, holding it up. "I faked my death because it was the only way to stay alive. And this," he gestured toward the USB, "this proves why." Emily's eyes locked onto the device. "Then tell me, what's on it?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "It's not just evidence of corruption. It's proof that Holloway and Calloway are covering up something much bigger." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "What are they hiding?" Daniel took a step closer. "A case involving high-ranking officials. Money laundering, secret offshore accounts, and even—" He stopped abruptly, his eyes shifting over Emily's shoulder. She barely had time to react before a black SUV screeched to a halt at the alley entrance. "Move!" Daniel shouted, grabbing her wrist and pulling her back just as the first gunshot rang out. The bullet slammed into the brick wall where Emily had been standing a second ago. She hit the ground hard, rolling behind a dumpster as more shots echoed through the alley. Daniel ducked beside her, clutching the USB tightly. "They're here to erase us." Emily reached for her concealed firearm. "We need to get out of here." Daniel peeked around the dumpster. "No exits. Unless you want to run straight into the court parking lot, which is probably already surrounded." Emily gritted her teeth. "Then we fight our way out." Daniel looked at her like she was insane. "There are at least 3 of them, and we're trapped." Emily pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. Not for long. The sound of sirens in the distance made Daniel glance at her in shock. "You call for backup?" Emily smirked. "You're not the only one who plans ahead." Within seconds, red and blue lights flashed at the alley's entrance. The attackers scrambled back into their SUV and sped away just as 2 court officers and local police stormed in. Emily exhaled, standing up and dusting herself off. Daniel followed, his grip still tight on the USB. "Now do you believe me?" he muttered. Emily turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I don't trust easily, Daniel. But I do know one thing: someone just tried to kill us outside a courthouse. That means whatever is on that USB is worth dying for." Daniel's voice was grim. "Exactly. And if we don't act fast, we might be next." The air inside the courthouse was heavy with tension as Emily and Daniel slipped through a side entrance, avoiding the main hall. The failed attack outside had made one thing clear: whoever was behind this conspiracy was willing to kill to keep it buried. Emily led Daniel down a restricted hallway, her badge flashing at the security cameras overhead. "We're going somewhere safe," she murmured. Daniel arched an eyebrow. "Inside the courthouse? You think this place is secure?" Emily didn't answer. Instead, she pulled open a heavy wooden door labeled Court Archives, restricted access, and ushered him inside. The room was lined with towering shelves filled with decades of case files, legal documents, and evidence logs. The scent of aged paper filled the space, muffled only by the distant hum of air vents. Daniel shut the door behind them. "You trust a room full of old case files to keep us safe?" Emily walked deeper into the archive, stopping in front of a locked cabinet. "No," she admitted, pulling out a key from her pocket. "But I trust what's inside here." She unlocked the cabinet, revealing a small but powerful encryption laptop. It was one of the courthouse's secured terminals, used only by legal officials to review classified case files. Emily had pulled a few favors to gain access. Daniel whistled low. "Impressive. But you really think plugging this in here is a good idea? What if they're monitoring the system?" Emily smirked. "That's why I'm not plugging it in." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a secondary USB identical to the one Daniel had stolen. Daniel's jaw tensed. "You had a backup?" Emily gave him a knowing look. "Did you really think I'd only have one copy of the evidence?" He exhaled, shaking his head. "Remind me never to underestimate you." She inserted the backup USB into the encryption laptop, bypassing external networks. "Let's see what's worth killing over." The screen flickered to life, revealing dozens of encrypted folders. Emily quickly decrypted the first file and skimmed the contents. Her eyes widened. "It's a ledger," she muttered. "Bank transactions, offshore accounts. Wait." Her finger hovered over a name. This is Judge Reynolds' signature." Daniel leaned over her shoulder, his expression darkening. "She's involved." Emily frowned. Maybe she signed off on something she didn't understand. Daniel scrolled further down, freezing when he saw another familiar name. Holloway. Emily's pulse quickened. "We suspected he was dirty, but this proves it." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "He's been laundering money through court settlements, paying off key witnesses, silencing people." Emily clicked another folder. A video file appeared. She hesitated for only a second before pressing play. The footage was grainy, likely recorded from a hidden camera. It showed a dimly lit room, two men sitting across from each other. One of them was Holloway. The other was Calloway. Emily turned up the volume. Holloway's voice crackled through the speakers. "Ross is dead. Or at least the world thinks he is. That should be enough to keep Lawson off our backs." Daniel inhaled sharply. Calloway leaned in closer on the screen. "And if she keeps digging?" Holloway smirked. "Then she disappears. Just like him." The video ended. Silence filled the archive room. Emily's mind raced. This was more than just corruption. It was premeditated elimination. Daniel broke the silence first. "We need to get this to someone we can trust." Emily nodded. "Not the police, not the FBI. This has to go straight to federal oversight." A sudden noise outside made them both freeze. The unmistakable sound of heavy boots against the archive's marble floor. Daniel's voice dropped. "They found us." Emily yanked the USB from the terminal and stuffed it in her pocket. She scanned the room, spotting a maintenance door in the corner. Without hesitation, she grabbed Daniel's wrist and pulled him toward it. "We can't fight in here," she whispered. "We escaped through the underground court service tunnels." Daniel gave a humorless chuckle. "Of course the courthouse has secret tunnels." Emily smirked despite the danger. "All good conspiracies do." The door handle twisted, and just as it swung open, they disappeared into the tunnels below. Emily and Daniel plunged into darkness as the heavy maintenance door swung shut behind them. The muffled echo of boots thudding against the courtroom floor above told them their pursuers weren't far behind. Emily switched on a small tactical flashlight from her belt, illuminating the narrow concrete tunnel stretching ahead. The air smelled of dust and damp paper, an abandoned passage beneath the courthouse, likely built decades ago for maintenance crews. Daniel glanced back, his voice low. "I assume you know where this leads?" Emily started moving, her steps swift but controlled. "It connects to a security checkpoint near the court archives. If we reach it before they realize we're down here, we might be able to slip out unnoticed." Daniel fell into step beside her. "And if we don't?" Emily didn't answer. They both knew the risks. The tunnel walls were lined with rusted pipes and flickering emergency lights. The air was thick with the weight of secrecy. How many people had walked these halls, hiding things that weren't meant to be found? They turned a corner, Emily leading the way. But as soon as they stepped into a wider corridor, she stopped abruptly, her flashlight revealing a metal security gate blocking their path. Daniel exhaled. "You've got to be kidding me." Emily examined the lock. This was supposed to be decommissioned years ago, but apparently someone forgot to remove the final barrier. "Can you pick it?" She pulled a small multi-tool from her pocket. "I can try. Keep watch." As Emily worked the lock, Daniel stood with his back against the cold wall, listening for movement. He could still hear faint voices above, searching, hunting. His mind raced back to the video file they had decrypted in the court archives. Calloway and Holloway had planned his death. And now, they wanted Emily gone too. Daniel clenched his fists. He had faked his death once. He wouldn't let Emily meet the same fate. A faint click snapped him back to reality. "Got it," Emily whispered, pushing the gate open just enough for them to slip through. They hurried into the next passage. The tunnel sloped upward now, meaning they were getting closer to the courthouse's upper levels. But as they reached another intersection, Emily suddenly stopped. She held up a hand. "Wait." Daniel barely had time to react before a faint red beam flickered through the dust-filled air. "Hey!" Laser tripwire. Emily muttered a curse. "They know about the tunnels." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We can't go back. We don't have time." Emily studied the setup. "We can disable it if..." A noise behind them made both of them freeze. Boots. Getting closer. Emily inhaled sharply. "We run. Now." She darted forward, twisting her body to slide under the laser. Daniel followed without hesitation. They landed hard on the other side, barely a second before a loud beep echoed through the tunnel. "That's bad, isn't it?" Daniel muttered. Emily grabbed his arm. "It means we've got about 30 seconds before they're on top of us." They sprinted down the tunnel, the distant sound of a metal door slamming open behind them. Daniel saw a faint light ahead. "Exit." Emily nodded. "It leads to the court's underground garage." Footsteps thundered closer. Shouts rang through the tunnel. They reached a heavy maintenance door, but as Emily pushed against it, the handle barely budged. "It's locked," she hissed. Daniel turned back. Shadows flickered against the tunnel walls. "Move!" He slammed his shoulder into the door. Once. Twice. On the third hit, it burst open. They stumbled through into the court garage, the smell of oil and gasoline hitting them instantly. Rows of parked vehicles stretched in every direction. Emily's mind raced. "We need a car. Now." Daniel pointed toward an unmarked sedan near the exit ramp. "That one." They ran for it, but as they reached the vehicle, tires screeched behind them. A black SUV skidded into the garage. The chase wasn't over yet. The black SUV's tires screeched against the concrete of the court garage, its headlights blinding as it sped toward them. Emily yanked open the sedan's driver's side door, shoving Daniel toward the passenger seat. "Get in," she barked. Daniel didn't hesitate. He barely had time to slam the door shut before Emily hotwired the ignition. The engine roared to life just as the SUV accelerated toward them. "Hold on," Emily warned. She slammed her foot on the gas. The sedan lurched forward, barely dodging the SUV as it tried to cut them off. The court garage exit ramp loomed ahead, but Emily knew they wouldn't make it without a fight. A second SUV appeared from the side, blocking their path. "Of course there's another one," Daniel muttered, bracing himself. Emily yanked the wheel left, skidding between two parked cars. The tires screamed as she maneuvered through the tight space, metal scraping against the side mirror. "They're hurting us," Daniel realized. Emily gritted her teeth. "Not if I can help it." The SUV behind them gained speed, closing in. A gunshot rang out, shattering the back windshield. Daniel ducked. "They're shooting in a court facility? These guys are getting desperate." Emily swerved. Again, cutting off their line of fire. She spotted a service ramp leading to the upper level of the courthouse, normally used for maintenance vehicles. An idea formed. A crazy, reckless idea. "How much do you trust me?" she asked. Daniel blinked. "Why do you sound like you're about to do something insane?" Emily didn't answer. Instead, she gunned the engine and aimed straight for the ramp. The sedan shot forward, tires barely gripping the pavement as they climbed the steep incline. The pursuing SUV followed, its headlights bouncing wildly with the uneven surface. At the top of the ramp, Emily spotted a court security gate, its barrier arm lowered. Beyond it, the streets of downtown stretched wide and open. Daniel noticed it too. That gate's reinforced. Emily's grip tightened on the wheel. Not for long. The sedan barreled forward at full speed. At the last second, Emily ducked, shielding her head. Crash. The impact sent a shower of splintered wood and twisted metal flying as the car burst through. The sedan skidded onto the street, tires screaming as Emily fought for control. Behind them, the SUV slammed on its brakes, stopping just short of the wreck barrier. Emily let out a sharp breath. "We're out." Daniel looked back, half expecting the SUVs to follow, but they didn't. The men inside hesitated, as if realizing they had just blown their cover in a court-secured facility. "They can't chase us without making this worse for themselves," Daniel muttered. Emily nodded, already weaving through traffic. "That gives us a small head start. But not for long." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "So what now? We can't go back to the courthouse, and whoever's after us clearly is power." Emily's mind raced. "We need a place to regroup. Somewhere secure." Daniel hesitated. "There's someone I trust. A retired judge. He's got no love for Holloway or Calloway." Emily glanced at him. "Will he help us?" Daniel's eyes darkened. "If he sees what's on that USB, he won't have a choice." Emily nodded and pressed the accelerator. Time was running out, and the only way to survive this was to expose the truth before the truth buried them first. The sedan pulled into the quiet residential street, its tires crunching against the pavement. The chaos of the courthouse was miles behind them, but the weight of what they carried, the USB filled with damning evidence, remained heavy. Emily kept the engine running, scanning the dimly lit neighborhood. "Are you sure about this guy?" Daniel nodded. "Judge Theodore Monroe. He retired 5 years ago, but he knows the system better than anyone. If we're going to expose this, we need someone with authority to verify it." Emily exhaled sharply. "Then let's hope he's still on the side of justice." They stepped out of the car and approached the judge's modest brick house. Daniel knocked twice. The porch light flicked on, and a few moments later, the door creaked open. Judge Monroe stood there, his sharp blue eyes studying them carefully. Though his hair was fully gray, he still had the presence of a man who once commanded a courtroom with nothing more than a glance. "Ross," Monroe said, his voice heavy with both recognition and disbelief. "You're supposed to be dead." Daniel offered a tight smile. "Turns out, reports of my death were exaggerated." Monroe's gaze shifted to Emily. "And you must be the Secret Service agent everyone in the courthouse is whispering about." Emily's jaw tightened. "If they're whispering, it means they're scared." The judge sighed, stepping aside. "Come in, but if you're bringing trouble to my doorstep, you'd better have a damn good reason." They entered the house, Monroe locking the door behind them. The living room was filled with legal books, framed certificates, and a portrait of him in his court robes. Monroe motioned for them to sit while he poured himself a drink. "Start talking." Daniel wasted no time. He pulled out the USB and placed it on the coffee table. "This has everything. Holloway and Calloway have been laundering money through court settlements, silencing witnesses, and getting rid of anyone who gets too close." Monroe took a slow sip of his drink. "And how do I know this isn't fabricated?" Emily spoke up. "Because we nearly got killed trying to bring it here. Because Daniel faked his death to escape these people. And because we have a video of Holloway admitting to it inside the court archives." Monroe's expression hardened. He picked up the USB, weighing it between his fingers. "If this is real, it's not just Holloway and Calloway. Corruption this deep means judges, attorneys, and law enforcement could be involved." Daniel nodded. "That's why we need your help. You still have connections in the federal system. If we release this through the right channels, we can expose them all." Monroe leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You do realize what happens if this gets out, right?" Emily met his gaze. "Justice happens." The judge let out a dry chuckle. "That's a nice sentiment. But in reality, the moment this goes public, powerful people will do everything they can to bury it, and us along with it." Daniel leaned forward. "So what do we do?" Monroe was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, moving to a desk in the corner of the room. He pulled open a drawer and retrieved a phone. "I'll call an old contact," he said. "A federal investigator I trust. If anyone can validate this without interference, it's him." Emily exchanged a glance with Daniel. It was risky, but it was their best shot. Monroe began dialing, but just as he raised the phone to his ear, bang! The front window shattered as a bullet ripped through the glass. "Down!" Emily shouted, tackling Monroe to the floor as another shot rang out. Daniel grabbed the USB and dove behind the couch. "They found us," the judge groaned, gripping his arm where a bullet had grazed him. Emily's eyes burned with fury. There was no doubt now whoever was behind this didn't just want to cover up a crime. They wanted to silence the court of justice itself. The air inside the judge's home was thick with the scent of gunpowder and shattered wood. Glass fragments littered the floor, reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights outside. Emily kept her body low, gun drawn, her heartbeat a steady drum in her ears. "Monroe, you hit bad?" she asked, eyes locked on the broken window. The retired judge gritted his teeth, clutching his bleeding arm. "Just a graze. I've had worse arguments in the courtroom." Daniel peered over the back of the couch. "Whoever they are, they're not playing around." Emily's jaw tightened. "We need to move. Now." Another bullet whizzed through the house, embedding itself into a bookshelf near the judge's desk. Whoever was out there wasn't shooting wildly. They were precise. A kill squad. Emily's mind worked fast. The front door was out. The windows were too exposed. That left the basement, Monroe grunted, nodding toward a wooden door near the kitchen. "It leads to a storm shelter." Emily didn't hesitate. She grabbed Monroe under his good arm and hauled him toward the door while Daniel covered them. As soon as they reached it, Daniel yanked it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into darkness. "Go!" Emily ordered. Daniel helped Monroe down while Emily kept her weapon trained on the window. A final glance outside revealed figures in tactical gear moving toward the house. They were running out of time. She slipped through the basement door and shut it behind her just as the front entrance of the House of the Court's last real hope was kicked open. The basement was cold, the air thick with dust. A single dim light bulb flickered overhead. Monroe slumped against the wall, his breath heavy but steady. Daniel paced, his hands clenched. "We can't just sit here. They'll clear the house and find us in minutes." Emily ignored the rising panic and focused on Monroe. "You have a way out?" The judge nodded weakly. "There's an old tunnel. It leads to the garage in the alley behind the house. Used it back in the day, when certain cases got too heated. Emily gave a sharp nod. Perfect. We move now. She helped Monroe to his feet while Daniel searched the walls. A moment later, he found a rusted metal latch and yanked it open, revealing a narrow passage. Go, Emily urged. I'll cover our exit. Daniel didn't argue. He helped Monroe. Into the tunnel, his voice steady. Just a few more steps, Judge. Then we're clear. Emily turned back toward the basement door, gun raised. Footsteps creaked above, moving methodically. They weren't in a rush. They thought their prey was cornered. Emily smirked. Not today. She slipped into the tunnel and pulled the door shut behind her just as the basement door burst open. The tunnel led them to the alley, where Monroe's old black sedan was parked under a dying street lamp. Daniel quickly helped the judge into the back seat. Keys. Monroe grunted, tossing them forward. Just don't scratch the damn thing. Emily slid into the driver's seat and turned the ignition. The engine rumbled to life just as a pair of gunmen rounded the corner. Hang on. She slammed the accelerator. The sedan peeled out of the alley, tires screeching. Gunshots cracked behind them, bullets sparking against the pavement. But they were too late. They were already gone. As the city lights blurred past, Daniel exhaled shakily. We need a plan. A real one. Emily kept her eyes on the road, her mind racing. We take this to the Federal Oversight Office. If anyone can bring this case out of the shadows, it's them. Monroe let out a bitter chuckle from the backseat. You're assuming the system still works. Emily's grip on the wheel tightened. Then we make it work. Because if they didn't, the court of justice would fall. Justice isn't just about laws, it's about those willing to stand up when the system fails. Tonight, Emily and Daniel proved that truth can't be silenced, no matter how deep corruption runs. But what do you think? If you were in their shoes, would you risk everything to expose the truth? Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you love thrilling stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an adventure. Where are you watching from?